Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, What Retail and Grocery Can Learn from the Cannabis Industry. I'm Sherry Kanzler, VP of Editorial for Networld Media Group, and I'll be your moderator today for our discussion on the many ways brick and mortar retailers are evolving and what they can also learn from the cannabis industry. Our speakers today are Julie Suntrup, the VP of Marketing and Merchandising at Swayze, a vertically integrated cannabis holding company, and Ian Rump, a digital interactive expert from Tella Digital, an digital experience solutions firm. Before we hear from Julie and Ian, though, I have a few housekeeping items. First, you'll be able to ask some questions by clicking the button that says Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom screen and typing your question there. We'll save those questions for the end and we'll ask them at the end of the presentation. But feel free to ask them all throughout the presentation. Also, later this week, you'll receive an email with a link to an on-demand version of the webinar. So I think that is everything on my end. So I'm going to kick things off to Ian. Ian?
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is something we're really excited about. I'm glad for everyone to be joining us here today. We've got Julie with us. And so just a little bit of background, intros before we get started. My name's Ian Rump. I am VP of Content Services for Tella. We specialize in digital experience marketing with an emphasis on connected marketing, which really just means making sure that everything you're doing from a marketing perspective is connected and strategic. We'll get a little bit more into that as part of what we discussed today. I have background in grocery. That's where I started my career, mostly digital marketing and content related to grocery. So a lot of what we're doing here, I've seen, overlap in terms of what could be applied to multiple industries, which is part of what we will discuss today. And I've got a partner, Julie from Schwazze, and Julie is VP of Marketing and Merch, as you guys heard. She's got a career in not only cannabis, but also CPG and a few other things as well. So Julie, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. If you wouldn't mind just giving a quick little background and then we can jump in.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Julie Suntrup with Schwazze. Schwazze is a Colorado-based cannabis company that is an entity of Plant Love Collective companies, and of which those include retail dispensaries as well. So we are in the middle of a merger and acquisition, actually an acquisition of the Starbuds locations in the state of Colorado, and quickly ramping up to having 17 locations in and around central Denver, northern Denver, and southern Colorado, and quickly expanding. And so my background is with Anheuser-Busch and working with other major CPG brands across digital, experiential, and traditional touch points. Happy to be here today joining Ian. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Awesome. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump in, give you guys some background in terms of what we're going to go through today. So we did the quick intros, and what I'd really like to do is just set the stage a little bit and help everyone understand, what we're going to be looking at and how it can relate to other industries, not only just cannabis. We're really going to speak to the importance of brick and mortar, especially in cannabis today, go through some connected marketing, and then also kind of speak to what we've learned from it and what we think it can apply in other industries. And then, as you guys heard, we'll also have a Q&A at the end of the session. So please submit questions and we'll try to get to them at the end as we're going through this. So first thing here, for some folks it's very familiar, for some it's not. The cannabis industry obviously is experiencing a major boom. Even with this past election cycle, we've got a lot of new states coming on board from a medicinal perspective as well as recreational. There obviously are states that are leading the pack, in terms of who did it first and the amount of dispensaries that are there. But it's something that's very interesting and exciting industry to be in because it functions state by state right now. There are tons and tons of one-offs, 1 to 2 offs, dispensaries that are owned by a number of people. but there really hasn't been that opportunity for major consolidation yet, and won't be until it's federally legal. But the point here that I'd like to make is, you've got thousands of dispensaries across the country now, but you don't really have the big players of the world just yet. So what's interesting about that is, how are you differentiating, and how are you making your space, a different experience for customers that come in versus the other one down the road. So really what I wanted to do here is just kind of set the stage and show you guys that there's a need, for having a very unique experience when it comes to your dispensary. And that's not anything that's, groundbreaking. Other industries, obviously everyone has got to have a great experience. That's how brick and mortar, has success. So you see it in grocery, you see it in furniture, you see it in other retail where, when you've got people in your locations, you've got to capitalize on it. And you got to make sure that when they leave, they've had a great experience. And obviously that's something that correlates to the business side of things, where really everyone's got the same goal, and that goal is to drive sales for their business. So what we've done, so in partnership with Schwaz, we've developed a dispensary solution that really focuses on a few main things that are all designed to help the customer experience as well as create efficiencies for the operations of the store itself. So this closely relates to grocery, to other industries, because you don't want your employees to have to deal with a bunch of operational things within the store when they could be spending time, whether it's merchandising or whether it's interacting with customers. They've got much more important things to do. So one of the things that we did is really look at what are we trying to solve for, and then design a solution around that. So you'll see here, I won't read them all to you. I know you guys can all read, but the main things are really increasing, the operational efficiencies. That could be something that we did through just a centrally managed display network and CMS. Really what you're trying to do is strengthen that brand loyalty. So utilizing the screens in a smart way to really showcase promos you've got going on, your own brand products, things like that. You want to really enhance that customer experience, because that's the feel-good side of things. That's where you really want people to come into your locations and have a different experience than they would at the other location down the road. And that's not only just having things like dynamic digital in place, but also having very relevant content that's shown on those displays. So we, as Tella, are very closely integrated with Schwaz and work very closely with Julie to determine what business goals are and develop all the content based off of that. You'll see a couple bullets there, just creating revenue streams. That's another thing that's very interesting to people. It can function very similar to how shopper marketing works in grocery. The Cpg space for cannabis is definitely evolving at a pretty rapid rate. At first, there was really only a few names that people would recognize, and they were very much specific to states that they come from. And now that's becoming a little bit different, where you've got some bigger players, but there's still a whole bunch of smaller one-offs that are trying to navigate. So there's a lot of opportunity for revenue streams from outside vendors, as well as focusing on what your own brands are, where you've got the highest margin. And then another thing that we applied to the strategy was, really trying to cross-sell, upsell, and not only from a business perspective, that's obviously good, but because cannabis is still a very new industry, you have a lot of new adopters that come into locations. Part of what we really wanted to focus on was really helping to destigmatize it and make it relatable, no matter who comes into the location. So part of what we focus on there is just helping to educate consumers prior to them even coming into the actual sales floor of the dispensary, because that can help with some things that, they can ask bud tenders about and really help them feel comfortable right away when they come in. And so obviously that's something that applies to other industries. Everyone wants to make sure that you've got a really welcoming environment. You want to make sure that people feel comfortable talking to employees or asking them questions, looking for recommendations and that sort of thing. So anything that you can do prior to that moment happening is helpful to the experience. And so this is just a very quick video that I'll kind of talk over as it plays. And the idea here is really just to show you exactly what goes into the strategy that we devised. And some of it is points that you'll see in the presentation in terms of business goals. But the main thing here is that we want to create a very, seamless and connected marketing experience. And part of that is trying to link what you're doing outside of your space to in your space. And we'll get into some of the kind of tricky pieces of this. Cannabis has a lot of regulation and certain things you can and can't do. Very similar to how a lot of the alcohol advertising laws are. But what you can do is take a pretty smart approach and work with what you got to really connect efforts from outside the store to the point where they come into the store. And then this is just a little example of what we can do when we're smart about it. We've actually seen a big basket increase for customers when they come into the stores when we're utilizing digital in a smart way. So this is something that you guys can find on our website or on YouTube as well if you wanted to look at it again, but I thought that would be helpful to kind of illustrate the overall strategy of what we worked on with Schwaz and what we implemented with them. So then moving on, what we've done here with some stores that are under the Schwaz brand is we've designed this idea of the customer journey in more of a linear way. And that the reason behind that is because cannabis dispensaries across the board have a very, very similar flow in terms of how customers interact with the space. So all of them have a lobby or some sort of a check-in, because when they first enter the store, you get checked in, show your ID, and then when the bud tenders are ready for you, you go back to the sales floor. So what we did is we took a pretty linear approach here in terms of what we utilize the displays for. And like I said, these are all commercial grade, centrally managed, so you don't have to worry about the bud tenders having to do any sort of updating or troubleshooting or anything like that at all. And the idea here is that it's something that you can maintain your brand consistency. A lot of the same, bullet points that you would see if you were looking at a digital signage system in general. But really the differentiator here is not only that, but really taking a smart and thoughtful approach to content. So to repeat a few of the themes here, right? Like when people first come in, you want to make sure that it's very welcoming. You want to make sure that they're able to kind of get accustomed to the space, maybe learn a little bit about the brand if they haven't been in before. So we took a pretty specific approach of introducing the brand, talking about kind of the roots of it and where it came from, and then as well as some more procedural things, especially with COVID and all of that, talking about the masks and things you can do to help reduce the possibility of spread. So it serves a lot of purposes that we've seen some really, really great feedback on, not only from the bud tenders, but also customers. And then moving into the sales floor, we've got a different customer touch point there. At that point, they're at their highest moment of purchase intent. So they're really looking to kind of learn and browse and see what's available. As the product mix increases, this will become even more important to pay attention to, because you could quickly be pretty overwhelmed, especially if you're a newer customer in the space. So this is something that we work very closely with Julie and team on in terms of understanding what their priorities are and what we really want to talk about on the screens while we have a customer's attention. And then we relate it really to how they can interact more with the bud tenders. So it's an important piece to say, because it's not intended to replace the role of a bud tender. It's really intended to help increase the interaction that they would have. And so we have this same approach in other industries. We have this in grocery, where you really want people to feel comfortable engaging. And a lot of grocery stores really pride themselves on having really good people that are there to, provide a great experience for customers while they're in there. So that theme carries over, especially into cannabis, where you really have a wide mixture of folks that are either experienced in the space or not experienced whatsoever. And so anything you can do to help increase that engagement is a positive thing. And then lastly, with the menu boards, so these are pretty straightforward. You really just want to make it obvious in terms of what pricing levels are and where you want to call attention. This is something that we integrate directly with point of sale on, so that you can have automated pricing by store. It's capable of doing dynamic as well. So when the day comes for that, that's ready to go. But the idea here is that we really are taking this off of the operational piece of the stores, so that they don't have to worry about making sure that anything they've got up there is priced incorrectly, even if it changes kind of midday. And then, Julie, is there anything you would add to what I just said there in terms of the journey, or some of the things that you've liked so far that we've seen with the Mesa Organic stores?
Yeah, I think one thing that's critical that you touched on is sort of the centralized control mechanism, which is, I think, key to maintaining consistency at retail and consistency across locations that are really scattered throughout the state, or throughout the country for that matter, as multi-state operators sort of get up and running and this expands quickly across state lines. What can you do to centralize and sort of contain the management of the screens while providing enough flexibility for regional sorts of promotions or regional brands to be featured? So the ability to be able to sort of control it from a sort of headquarters support center, so that the field is supported, but the consistency of the branding is recognized at the retail footprint, is pretty key, and also just takes the pressure off of, a bud tender team or a store manager to have to fiddle with the technology aspect, right? So focus on managing the consumer experience, talking with the patient in store, and working on brand education, and less, organizing sort of the systems and processes and technology stack behind the scenes, right? So having some sort of a centralized way of doing that, and also a way of decentralizing that when you need to, or turning certain systems off and turning other ones on based on promotions or brands that you're promoting is pretty critical, and that flexibility is really warranted.
Yeah, great point, Julie. Thank you for that. So I think, if we've got anybody from the grocery industry on, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, where it's very hard to ensure execution at store level for campaigns, promotions, etc. And that's simply just because the operators in the store, they've got so much to do that's kind of the last thing that they're thinking about. So the really nice and obvious piece of having something centrally managed is that the marketing team, or whoever's in charge of it, really is able to ensure that whatever campaigns, whatever new brand standards, etc., that are being put into place, that those are being executed because you have control of it, and you have the ability to ensure that you've either got the same brand standards across the board, or, to Julie's point, you can still break it down location by location, so it's not one size fits all per se. And you can still have these custom schedules and experiences built in that fit best with the store location. So a little bit more on connected marketing. So we just touched on the on-premise side of things. The piece that's pretty unique that I think in the space in general, in the digital space in general, is still being figured out by a lot of people, is really how you're connecting online to that in-store experience. So the way that it kind of functions at the moment is you have these kind of siloed marketing cycles where you have something that's online and what I like to call traditional digital, which is what you'd expect with paid social and all the different Google ad type, things like that. And then you have typically a different experience when you get to the store level. So especially if we're thinking about this from a grocery perspective, you've got e-com that's blown up in the last couple of years. So now you've got a whole e-com system you've got to manage. You've got to be able to relate that to whatever you're doing from a loyalty perspective. And then you've got to also be able to connect that to in-store, because you're always going to have folks that are a mixture in terms of what they prefer, and it could be day to day on whether or not they want to come in to get whatever they need or whether they'd rather just order it online. And really making sure that those things are connected and working together is something that I think the industry as a whole, and in terms of marketing, has gotten a lot better at over the last couple of years, but there's still this pretty big gap there. So part of what we, at Tella are looking to do is help to, ease people into this connected marketing concept, where you're really taking a piece of the puzzle and helping to have that flow through and work well with your existing systems, versus trying to just do it all at once and end up with a mess of data that might not be as actionable as someone would like. So we'll get into more of that, but here's a good example of kind of the flow. We like to call this kind of our slim execution. And really what this is taking a smart approach to how you're connecting those marketing efforts, where you don't have to throw tons and tons of money at every possible traditional digital advertising method. You can really use data, and that's something that we work really closely on with all of our clients, but you can use data to tell you, where you're going to have the most success and relate that to what you're really trying to do from a business perspective. So in this example, right, we've got, an advertisement here that's really just a product ad. It's just featured on a site. You've got a actual banner ad in that second part where you're able to target accordingly. There are limitations in the cannabis industry in terms of what you can do. So we're very careful about the different channels that we utilize, and there's a lot of things from a marketing perspective you have to take into account, like what's the audience size, especially if you're going to get specific. Is it too small? Are they going to see it? Those are questions that are always asked prior to launching anything. And then really, because you don't have great options at the moment when it comes to e-com in the cannabis space, you still need to execute in store to make sure that you're really closing that loop and capitalizing on it. So that's where I think right now, especially in the cannabis space, brick and mortar is immensely important. I think in other industries, grocery, all those, you're still always going to have a brick and mortar presence of some form. There always will be people that, let's say, want and need to purchase fresh items in person. They don't necessarily trust someone to do it for them, but maybe they buy everything else that's packaged and use e-com. So you're always going to have this mixture of where you need to satisfy customers, but especially in the cannabis space at the moment, you can do a lot in terms of trying to get people into the store, but you still need to close in the store. And that's where that execution and the strategy that we spoke about really, really comes into play. All right, so this is kind of the meat of what we're going to talk about here today. And Julie, this is where, I'd love to hear your perspective on some of this. But what I did here is, cannabis adopted digital kind of day one, which is interesting because most industries, you have to help them adopt it as well as then take it to the next step to implement. Grocery, you're starting to see it a little bit more here and there in terms of having digital within these stores. But it's still very much an old school industry that utilizes old school methods to merch and promote. And it hasn't really gotten to that point. So what's different with cannabis is that they kind of had digital day one. New industry, younger demographic for the most part. What they did is most of them took a basic screen, just bought a kind of residential version of a screen, plugged in a Chromecast or something like that to it, and then used that to update their menus and their prices. Now, what we're seeing, as you kind of saw from that very first slide, is the cannabis industry, with this boom, it's gotten to a point where it needs to mature, especially as more states are legalized and you start to have some of these multi-state operators. You're going to need to have an upgraded, kind of matured experience and execution when it comes to digital. So, what we're seeing here is what you can learn not only from cannabis upcoming, but also in other industries, is that simple solutions, even at the very basic level of something that's centrally managed, can be very, very effective just at the base level, even before you get into the more connected marketing piece that's a little bit more dynamic and requires a little bit more data strategy. But what I put here really is that, we had operational efficiencies as one thing we were looking to solve that with the commercial grade, centrally managed displays. We're looking to strengthen that brand loyalty. What we do is really take a storytelling content approach versus just kind of showing products and price over and over and over again. We found that that's very effective in terms of how we're measuring. And that's something that should be, taken note of depending on the business. A good example to kind of clarify what I'm saying there is that, you might have a retailer that's very much just a price-based retailer. The experience that is expected is really, I get the lowest prices on my products and that's it. And then you're going to have these other experiences, that are designed to be a little bit more of an experiential thing, where, people want to come in and learn about the brands, learn about the vendors. They want it to be local. They want to understand where things are coming from. Price isn't necessarily the main factor. And that's where that storytelling content really, really can help drive awareness and sales for those products. We've also looked at obviously enhancing the customer experience, making it a differentiated experience when there's so many options in the space right now. You really want to make sure that what you're doing stands out from the rest and makes it another reason why people would want to come, shop your store versus others. Obviously that goes hand in hand with how you're running the store, with the type of merchandise that you've got in there. And then you complement and expand that with presence of digital. And then I think, kind of the last piece of this is really that revenue stream that can be found in other industries. In grocery, like I've mentioned before, you've got Shopper, so you've got different ways you can activate on Shopper and utilize that kind of first party data to be able to sell that as space to CPGs. Same thing can happen in cannabis, and we'll get to that point as there are more and more brands that are trying to, find their piece of the pie, so to speak. And really, if you're smart about how you're doing it, you can not only create revenue streams just for ad placement, but you can also identify some of those higher margin products and really make a focus of content around those, which really at the end of the day is going to help not only drive your own brand efforts, but it's also going to return the most margin from those sales, because you don't have to do any discounted promos and things like that if you're really featuring them in a smart way on digital. And that's what we've seen from a lot of the measurement stuff that we've done, which is also available on the website if you guys are interested. But yeah, so the idea here really is that cannabis is a little bit of a blank slate when it comes to a lot of the best practices, but a lot of what's being tested in the space and already showing really great results are things that can be directly applied to other industries that are much more long-standing, that maybe are just a little bit behind when it comes to digital adoption. And then Julie, I'd love to just kind of open it up to you for a second here, and you can maybe speak to some of the main points that we talked about here in terms of what you've seen success in and kind of what you're thinking about as we go forward.
Yeah, this is great. I think in terms of where cannabis is right now, and we talked earlier regarding customer journey and what that looks like between online and social and through sort of into stores, that cannabis is really just laying the foundation right now, given that the industry is so nascent, and even the most evolved markets really kicked off only in a medical perspective in 2009. So if you think about just the journey in the cannabis space, it's so new. And there are so many things we can learn from the retail and CPG sort of arena that can be easily applied. And maybe the retail and CPG industries will learn something from cannabis too, right? In terms of innovation, in terms of testing and learning and flexibility and pivoting quickly. The most effective approach that we've sort of seen to in-store marketing is the merchandising of the products. And that does definitely stem from a major CPG and retail category sort of perspective. So leaning into best practices for merchandising, which means displaying the products, organizing and grouping the products, and having sort of strategy around pricing. So whether that's looking at a sort of low to high price range, whether you're organizing the products by actually product category or subcategory even, because for example, the edibles category is so huge right now that there's gummies and there's baked goods and there's tinctures that fall within that, or pills and capsules. And also how you're displaying the merchandise in store. Is it at eye level? Are there brands that are high quality, maybe high margin brands for you that you want to display at eye level for people, so that you really push those brands more sort of proficiently. Obviously connecting the in-store marketing to the digital experience from start to finish. That includes everything that Ian talked about, from the sort of front room in the sales room to actually your one-on-one interaction with the bud tender. And that digital experience for us actually extends into the back room. So back of house is really important for our bud tender education, and also for shift changes and understanding what's coming and what's going, and when promotions start, when they stop, and just also, any sort of compliance or legal updates that we can have. And so that digital experience can translate into the back of house as well too. And then another component to effective in-store marketing is really word of mouth. And that starts with the bud tenders and the experience that our team has with our patients, with our consumers, and vice versa. So if you have a good experience with a bud tender or a wellness specialist or whatever you call your back of house, front of house people, that experience that you have really translates. And so in terms of building consumer loyalty, one of your biggest components for your in-store, your brick and mortar marketing effort is your experience that you provide to your consumers and your patients in store. And that's really, really important in terms of building a consistent experience and a mainstream and sort of normalized experience, welcoming experience. And then finally, a connected sort of experience. So how do we connect the in-store brick and mortar to an online experience, whether that's through the website, whether it's a form of online ordering, whether you're building your own system or you're tapping into an existing online ordering system, and then integrating it into your loyalty program. And so that requires a lot of technology stack integration, which we can learn a ton from how CPG and how retail, how grocery has worked, and apply those best practices to the entire, what I call the holistic sort of consumer experience, right? Because you have people who are showing up to your store literally intent to purchase. So you don't go to a cannabis store not intending to purchase, because it's a sort of lengthy, time-consuming process, or it can be, with showing your ID and age gating, not only once, but it normally happens twice, if not 3 times while you're in the store. And so how can we influence that captive audience that is showing up at a retail location with an intent to purchase? They're not showing up just browsing for shoes at Nordstrom. They're showing up with an intent to buy something. And so how can we influence that purchase, add another item to the basket, and look at really increasing the overall average ticket price, and also shortening the cycle between repeat purchases. So if your average purchase is every 18 days, can we shorten it to 14 days? And what can we do within a holistic consumer experience to do that?
Great points, Julie. And I think one thing, just to tag on to that too, we didn't talk a whole lot about the different hardware that's available. But the unique thing about how far digital has come is that you can pretty much, if you can kind of dream it up, you can probably get it done from a tech perspective these days. So to Julie's point about the back of house communications and all those different things, the unique thing about this system that we've put in place here is really, the fact that it's the foundation for pretty much everything else you'd want to do. So, we've got some things on the roadmap with Schwaz, with Julie's team here, that are more personalized experiences for customers. So integration with loyalty that basically then says, if Ian comes into the store and Ian's checked in, the content could dynamically change to things that, I like, that I typically buy. We can also send indicators to the bud tenders themselves, at the point of sale, to basically bring up the profile of the customer and help them to be able to jump right in with the customer and kind of know what they typically like or typically are looking for, which really just increases that connection that Julie was talking about between people that come in and have a great experience and know that bud tenders are there to really help them and have a baseline of what they like. And that translates very well into that word of mouth that we were speaking to. So yeah, the digital capability that's available is just fantastic these days. And it's something that I think just more awareness around it will really help to drive execution of some of those things, because pretty much if you can dream it at the moment, it is something that you could execute it on. So great point, Julie. Thank you for that. I actually just saw a question come in about QR codes.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great question, because QR is something that, it's funny, I think I was discussing it just last week with Julie, but it was something that was, it was a really unique, hot thing that came out, but you had to have an app to actually use it. So it died out, but now they're back because it's integrated into people's regular camera phones.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. It's definitely made it easier to use. And thanks, Jennifer, for asking that question. We do use QR codes in store. Primarily, they're used for a couple different things, and I think we can connect them even more carefully. We use QR codes to drive traffic to our loyalty platform to get consumers to sign up to loyalty and sort of bringing them into our loyalty loop. We also use QR codes to prompt people to leave us reviews on Google or Yelp or any other directories like Leafly or Weedmaps. So I think we can get tighter on using those QR codes and use them in more circumstances where and when it's appropriate.
Totally agree. So yeah, great question, because that is something that we definitely have utilized, and there's many different use cases for that, not only outside of the store, but also in store, right? We talked about the education, we talked about making sure people understand what promos might be going on, drive loyalty, etc. Those are all things that we've utilized and can utilize as well in different points of that customer journey, that allow people to kind of control that experience for themselves if they don't necessarily feel comfortable just outright asking for it. So great question. Thank you for that. And I think we've got a couple other questions that are coming in.
Yeah.
So I think what we can do is call this the Q&A section. I just saw one, Patricia. If a dispensary is using a delivery service such as Dutchie or Ease, can they advertise there? And the short answer to that is absolutely yes. And so the strategy that we've taken there is really making sure that client by client, it's something that's owned by our clients, meaning they can decide what goes on to the screens from a content perspective, from an ad perspective. We don't typically run the digital as a form of a digital out-of-home ad placement. There are use cases like that do make sense. But typically what we would do in that scenario is whoever the partner is, if they had interest in, finding space within the playlist, you could sell it the same way you would sell any other ad placement. And also related to that with CPGs, because there's, especially just every single day, there's more capabilities around what you can measure from an in-store perspective. You can actually find models that look a lot like the impression models that you see in traditional digital, where you've got an idea of store traffic, you've got an idea of transaction count, et cetera. And you can also obviously provide proof of play around the different pieces of content. So at Tella, that's one thing that we do to help connect it all, is really look at, what's playing, what was the effect of it, and basically whether or not it's the product promo or if it's awareness play, we measure that differently. But the idea there is that you then have some sort of campaign reporting that you can use as a way to really price ad placements within your stores. Great question. So maybe let's just kind of open it up. I'm seeing more questions come in.
I see a question regarding thoughts on audio or sound reinforcement to create stores' identity. I absolutely love that idea. I haven't cracked the code on that yet for Schwazze stores and for the Schwazze brand, but I do think there's always a debate at retail about audio and sound and music, and some people like it and some don't. Some think it's sterile if you don't have music. Then some budtenders hate your music voice. I mean, it's an ongoing sort of debate. I do have a thought on selling ads in revenue or in venue to ad networks. So it has sort of come up within Schwazze whether or not there are any other brands, for example, AT&T, would they be interested in selling across, ads across our networks in store? I mean, I don't know that there would be an interest just yet, but I definitely think as we get to 50 to 100 stores, there is power in that network, and it's a definite opportunity to gain some revenue and to create partnerships that are outside of just the cannabis product space.
Great point. Yeah. So let's see. So yeah, and with the audio question too, to tag on to that as well, Julie, you're absolutely right in terms of it all depends on, what the brand experience, requires, so to speak. So we've seen it in so many other industries, within grocery and all that. You've got that kind of in-store radio that's playing. And so for the most part, you wouldn't want to have content that's got audio, because all of a sudden you've got a bunch of different audio tracks that are happening. We've done some interesting testing there in grocery, specifically related to trying to marry the two, where you've got kind of breaks in the radio and then audio that comes from the screens. It's pretty new in terms of testing, and so there's not a whole lot that we can report back in terms of measurement on whether it's effective or not. The interesting piece of that is that it does break up what you kind of consider your typical experience. So as you can imagine, feedback from that is mixed. Some people really like it because it's something new. Some people kind of find it confusing to have things going on and off. So it's an interesting question. I would say that as of today, 95% of the content that we put out there on these screens does not have audio. And that's typically just for what Julie just touched on, where you have either music playing or you've got some sort of in-store reel that's already going, and want to cloud that with additional audio for that. So I would say for the most part right now, we use a non-audio approach, but it's something that is definitely possible and just really depends on what that brand experience is supposed to be. All right.
I see there's a question regarding content and how we get content for the in-store digital displays. Actually, at Schwazze, we team up with Tella to produce the content right now for our digital displays. And they have dynamic ways of sort of bringing that to life to make sure that it looks interesting and intriguing. And there's ways that we can break up the screens to run sort of separate content in separate pods, so to speak. And I'm sure I'm not doing doing the Tella team justice here. So if you do want to talk a little bit more in terms of the technology aspect, Ian, sounds like there's some questions around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the screens, this is kind of related to the point of if you can dream it, you can probably do it. So to Julie's point there, we can actually segment the screens. You can split them up. We kind of refer to them as zones. I don't know if there's an official term out there, but we refer to them as zones. So you can imagine it like part of the screen is playing, a video, lifestyle, featuring some merchandise or products or whatever. And part of the screen then has a static product shot with pricing. So you can do some dynamic things. Obviously, you could do things like throw a news ticker at the bottom or whatever you want there. Just kind of depends on what the goal is and whether or not the focus is to, not only provide both lifestyle and price, but or if it's more of an educational play, then you might not need that. So that's one thing that we can do, and we do it on a case-by-case basis. And then closely related to that too, there's another question regarding how we are building these experiences. And so it's a mixture. I would say that a lot of the stuff we do from the measurement side, from content, is something that we develop proprietary in terms of best practices, how we break it up, how we schedule, the different rule sets that we use for dynamic. And then just in terms of the actual hardware, we are partnered with Samsung. So we typically we have other partners in the space as well that are other CMS options, and there's plenty out there. They vary in terms of what their strong points are. But what we found is that these commercial grade products that Samsung has are the best in terms of being most reliable. They're something that connect very easily to everything else that we spoke about, especially when it comes to data integrations or anything dynamic. So there's some proprietary stuff there that we've built out on our end. But if you look at the very base level of what we've been speaking about in terms of centrally managed, it's just simply a display that has a CMS function. Sometimes those media players are external, sometimes they're built in. In the case of what we do, they're built in, so you don't need additional hardware. They connect purely just through Wi-Fi, or you can hardwire them if you want, but quite honestly, we deploy 90% of our experiences and just utilize the Wi-Fi because it's such a low bandwidth effort. And also the really unique thing about what this system has that we use is that it's not streaming or anything like that. So you don't have to worry about Wi-Fi issues as much as you do with some of the other solutions, because if Wi-Fi goes down, the display will continue to play the content that was previously sent to it. It lives locally until you change it. You can customize how often it checks in and all that sort of thing as well. It's very, very customizable, but what's really nice is that even if you are experiencing Wi-Fi outages here and there, for the most part, you're never going to see a break in the content, and you'll never have a blank or error screen like you've seen in some installations in other places, I'm sure. Great question. And if you want to learn more about that too, obviously we're more than willing to kind of dive into some of the details of it. because it is very much a mixture of some products that are out there, as well as some proprietary things that we've done to stand up this connected and kind of smart environment.
There's a question here too about dispensaries implementing education into the digital signage, and if we're seeing that a lot. And I am seeing that a lot. Some are doing it more than others, and I think some are doing it better than others. I do think there is a huge opportunity for introducing educational content, especially in the waiting room or the lobby. And that's part of the consumer experience too, especially as more and more audiences are brought into the cannabis sector. Those are audiences that typically did not grow up with cannabis, so they have a lot of questions about it. And they also want to feel that they're coming to a safe and secure environment to understand and learn, and it can be super intimidating. So the screen should definitely be used for educational content, and that's another way to sort of meet your customers where they are in the customer journey, or what I call the consumption sort of continuum. So, you know, different people come into cannabis at different states and different levels of understanding. And so the in-store digital screens are just another way to communicate, to educate, and to reinforce, and leave a huge opportunity in that space.
Great question. And then, yeah, so there's another one too from Patricia about have brands or agencies started to use traditional shopper marketing strategies in the cannabis space? Julie, I think this might be a good one for you to take. I can say my brief piece on that, where it's so new that depending on what you're referring to as traditional, I don't know if they're quite there yet, but I know that Julie and team have done quite a few things to kind of ramp up those efforts in a specific cannabis way. So maybe Julie, if you could just touch a little bit on that and how that's functioned so far.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, there is a major opportunity, and some retail dispensaries will be sort of further along in this area than others in terms of applying traditional shopper marketing experience to the space. A lot of that comes down to merchandising and designing your store in a way that is shoppable, even though in most cases you can't really touch any of the products. You can only look and see because they're behind the counter. If they're not behind the counter, they're empty products and brands, so you really can't necessarily see them unless they're under glass. But there is a way to think about the experience and putting things at eye level, or grouping things even by need state. So if you're having trouble sleeping, are there products designed that can help you with sleep, for example, as opposed to just, you know, looking at things in terms of a flower category or a vape category? There are lots of ways to connect the loyalty experience, and that's becoming more and more sophisticated, introducing loyalty programs to drive in-store traffic. And because at that point, if you're a loyalty member, you're a captive member, right? And so using those best practices of loyalty and integrating that into the shopper experience, and building brand loyalty, not only in a matter of you know, collecting points and maybe saving money, but also the component of loyalty drivers of saving time. So if you can connect the loyalty app to the e-commerce online ordering app, where you can get payments online or get orders online, you can't quite transact fully 100% in cannabis yet, but you can connect that to your loyalty platform and experience. You can save your customers time. And that is a huge loyalty driver, is making a consistent experience that's clean, that is connected and easy. And then also serve up exclusive offers, coupons or whatever you might want to call it, where it's in your digital wallet, where you show up in store and use those. So there's a huge opportunity to connect into the shopper marketing area from a traditional perspective, and really leverage all of those best practices and figure out the best way to actually implement those in store at a dispensary.
Yeah, that's great. So, you know, kind of dovetailing on that too, there's a question related to what's the next phase of evolution or innovation for the industry. And I think, Julie, that would be really, really cool to hear from you on for everybody that's listening. What do you think is next? Where do you think it's going?
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot of different paths we can take on that. One way I think it's evolving is in product innovation, and there will be products that will be designed to meet specific need states and relieve specific ailments. And there will be a cross at some point as it relates to pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals in the cannabis space. So the more we learn about the cannabis plant and what it can do for our well-being, for our mental agility and fitness and our physical body, and the role of all of the minor cannabinoids, the more we can actually solve problems to physical ailments and introduce products that have a specific purpose in mind, as opposed to just getting someone high. And so that will definitely be an evolution in the product space. I think as an evolution in operating practices, there's a huge opportunity to apply all of the best practices we've learned across CPG and retail into a mainstream cannabis business. And that, for me, represents a whole cross-functional team integration where you're actually looking at building partnerships with your third-party partners, and whether they might actually pay for display space in store or display advertising on your digital monitors in store, right? Leveraging your buying practices, getting a centralized buying strategy together, looking at your categories, doing category and subcategory reviews, and doing things like conducting SKU rationalizations. And all of that goes down to, there's multiple levels of all of this, including tying in e-com, delivery, loyalty marketing. All of that requires major technology stack integration, which CPG and retail are very well informed in that space. But also, finally, for me, is a big component is data analytics. So how do we look at segmenting our consumers, and how are we measuring what actually works? And doing that, getting very disciplined around it, actually hiring people within your team to do those and perform those, so that you're testing and learning, and you can develop predictive modeling or predictive analytics to just build on those successes. So lots of innovation as it relates to just products and product and differentiation, especially in the CBD space, because CBD is really an entire sea of sameness as it relates to products. There's not a lot of product differentiation. And then also in terms of applying sort of cross-functional team integration and best practices that you're leveraging from the CPG and retail space in terms of how you're actually operating your business is one huge area of innovation that Schwazze is focused on.
Perfect. I think that's a great insight, Julie. Thank you for that. I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up today. Really appreciate everyone attending and the great questions that we got. Obviously, if you guys have any more questions for us, feel free to reach out. You can find Tella on our website, telladigital.com, and schwazze.com. Julie, thanks so much for joining with us today. I think there is a sign-off from the team.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, especially to you, Ian and Julie. We really appreciate your insight. And to all of our attendees, if you didn't get your question answered, they will be in touch with you to get those answered. And also just please remember to check your inboxes for our on-demand version of this webinar. So with that, I will let you get back to your day and have a great one. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.